Okay, welcome to this second workshop on citizen entrepreneurship, which is a project which is currently being sponsored by the Regional Studies Association, and we have entitled our project Citizen Entrepreneurship. Just by way of a background, I wanted to start off by simply giving you a little bit of a background on the project. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we had a workshop originally, and we are concentrating on this occasion at how do we actually engage citizens. The whole purpose of the project is about engaging citizens in research, design, methods, and data collection. So just by way of a background, if I could, oops, this doesn't move. I don't know why this doesn't move. I've got to stop share and start again. Sorry about this. I don't know what's happening over here. Good afternoon to you, everybody, again. If it doesn't work, I'll have to just use my brains as screen. For some reason, it's not working. Yeah, good. Okay. Technology has its wonders, and maybe citizens of the world can help me when I'm stuck, because that is the whole purpose of moving on with this project. Well, when we talk about citizen entrepreneurship, I just want to show you very few examples of the extent to which citizen entrepreneurship and citizen engagement, which is the primary purpose of our project, is gaining ground rapidly and in a transformative way across the world. Harbury is a small town part of a small town in Market Harbour in the UK, where climate change initiatives taken by local people have not only resulted in a range of clean projects, but also increasingly with international cooperation, for example, with the Masai Mara community in Kenya. Seoul in Korea is a fantastic example of a housing project started by disenfranchised student community, homeless students, who essentially got hold of void property and decided to start a free-for-all housing property, which has now gained so much ground that it is part of the legitimate housing arrangements of the city. If you know Kaisai in China at all, it is the if you like, the global center for tofu. And tofu and architecture are not necessarily the appropriate mix, but it is a classic example of how architects from around China, but particularly concentrating in Kaisai, have essentially entered into a project with citizens to create local architecture, which protects the historic value of that particular place. And a remarkable project in Burundi with France involving refugees, which is essentially for refugees who have gone through an extraordinary amount of trauma, and how a mobile library project and connectivity is engaging this refugee community, not with the heartland of Burundi and with refugees in other parts of the world. And of course, when we look at the implications of technology, the extent to which our health sector has been transformed, and what we called Health 6.0 today is primarily a customer-driven model, which is about engaging in lifelong partnerships, customer well-being, quality of life. So in a number of fronts, we find the increasing involvement of citizens. And the major reason for that is because we find that there are some very serious disconnects from ecological issues to income to financial leadership, consumerism, governance, ownership, right across the spectrum. We find serious disconnects which are calling into question the way our institutions are run, the way our public polity is run, the way our educational institutions are run, and indeed the way we are all under serious kind of sort of burnout as a result of poor governance, poor institutionalization, which disenfranchises citizens alone. And these can be identified at several levels. At the surface level, which is obvious, at the structural level, and indeed in terms of the limits, perhaps, that we have reached in order to do things exactly the way that we have done before. So we need a new way of doing things. But citizen engagement is not new. There has been a lot of work that's been done before involving citizens. There's a lot of work that's been done by both theoreticians as well as practitioners. And they center around the essential rights and duties and responsibilities of citizens. But what has been missing from the agenda is, whilst we talk about rights, duties, and responsibilities, the nature of the engagement and how we actually engage with citizens has perhaps been lost. And it is thanks to the citizens' own initiatives that these things are beginning to surface again. And indeed, in 2013, citizen engagement became a strategic priority for the World Bank, and with a corporate goal of achieving 100% beneficiary feedback by 2018 in all World Bank Group operations. And they have led to some really key World Bank lessons. But unfortunately, when we look at entrepreneurship and innovation and policy and practice, we find that there is a significant deficit in terms of addressing both the big issues and essentially how do you engage citizens, which is of course not the case when it comes to citizen science, which we will talk about later on. So in trying to develop our ideas, we have formulated a kind of definition, if you like, a conceptualization, which talks about the identification and realize of opportunity for all people, whether that be to make new products, new services, or essentially organize themselves differently through the creation of new projects at different levels, but crucially involving citizens as producers, users, members of communities, not simply as consumers and user groups. And the way that is done, it is by developing capabilities, because people need to be supported to achieve collective good, and with which to exercise not only their economic, social rights and responsibilities, but to operate as a potentially collective community of citizens. And of course, this conceptual framework is informed by three theoretical strands: the Schumpeterian idea of innovation as a social good, Elinor Ostrom's idea of the commons, and Amartya Sen's idea of developing capabilities. By the way, the stepped effect in the diagram is purely a conceit. It's not suggesting that any one particular concept is more important than the other. All three are essential for our purposes. And one thing which we want to start off with is by distinguishing citizen entrepreneurship from other forms of entrepreneurship which we are aware of, whether that be business entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and collective entrepreneurship. And the most important considerations over here, I'm not going to go into the detail essentially, but the concern over here that we have is that, or rather the beauty of citizen entrepreneurship is that we are engaged with the process part of it. Citizen entrepreneurship embraces all kinds of entrepreneurship, social, business, etc. We are not excluding the idea or suggesting that citizen entrepreneurship is a completely new way of doing things at the expense of other forms of entrepreneurship, or that it is better than the other. But it is about how the different forms of entrepreneurship can be used, and innovation can be used to generate well-being, and how citizens can be engaged in the process. Those who are entrepreneurs themselves are citizens, but quite often they are lost, if you like, from the wider community of citizens with in whose communities they are fundamentally placed. And we have some projects which we have started work on, and they are really interesting projects which address, as I said, the meta issues, local environment, for example, in Łódź in Poland, the habitat, place where you live and work project in Hanover, Germany, and the Art for Livelihoods and Sustainability project in India. And we're hoping, not only at this workshop, but during the passage of time, that we will be able to involve other projects. And essentially, there are two purposes behind this particular project. One, of course, is the research agenda, and the other is the development of the project network. So this is by way of introducing it. we have conceptualized our first kind of sort of piece which was published in the Journal of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, an article which, if you would like to go and read, you may find that over there in volume 6, issue 2, and the first ever accredited academic course on citizen entrepreneurship, which we have developed at Leuphana University in Germany. So that is by way of a very simple introduction to citizen entrepreneurship, just for laying the groundwork for the session today. It is now our turn to start the session, and I couldn't ask for a better person than, of course, than Sally Hardy, perhaps to say a few opening words of welcome for that. Sally is the CEO of the Royal Society, the Regional Studies Association. Beg your pardon, I always confuse you with the Royal Society of Arts. Who knows, a merger might be in place someday, but probably not now. The Regional Studies Association CEO, Sally Hardy. Sally, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Jay, and thank you for inviting me to join you this morning. It's really great to see so many people here. I don't want to interrupt the flow of the discussions. What I do want to do is just share a couple of initiatives that we're running at the moment that might be of interest to you. And if it's all right, Jay, I'd just like to quickly share my screen with you. So I hope you can all see that. So thank you very much for inviting me to join you. This workshop is one of 5 workshops as part of this research network funded by the RSA. I want to draw your attention to the fact that we're running a global e-festival for the next 2.5 weeks. It starts next week on Wednesday, and it runs for 2.5 weeks. It's absolutely free for you to attend if you're not giving a paper. The details are all on the website, and you can and all over Twitter as well. So I encourage you to engage with the RSA and to come and take a look at the academic sessions that are being run through the Regions in Recovery Global e-Festival. You're all more than welcome to join us. I wanted to also give you some information about other grant schemes that we're running, because the deadlines are coming up. So your network has some funding through our research networks funding scheme. We also have a small grant scheme which is looking at pandemics, cities, regions and industry. The deadline is fast approaching on the 30th of June. We will give another 6 grants at that point. We also do early career, membership and fellowship grants. The early career grant is the 28th of May. Actually, that should be 2021. But you can see that it's 1st of September for the other grants. If you're interested in applying for any of this funding, please feel free to approach me. Over the last few years, we've spent almost £1 million supporting organisations such as yourselves, but also giving these career starting small grants. I want to let you know that we're looking for editors on some of our journals. We have 5 journals and 3 of them are appointing at the moment. So Regional Studies is looking for a regular editor and book review editor, and then 3 of our journals are seeking early career editors. So if you're within 5 years of getting your PhD, you would be eligible to apply to be an early career editor. These are mentored posts, and we know that they're career starting because we track the people that get the roles and we watch them go from untenured to tenured and secure employment. And it's a massive privilege, I think, to be able to see other people's work as it's submitted to journals. We have no difficulty finding editors. The editors really enjoy the work. Although I have to say that the last year has been a significant challenge. All of our journals have seen big uplifts in the number of journals, articles submissions. So this is just a closing slide, really, that sets out how the RSA tries to work with communities such as yours. We see ourselves as serving the regional studies and the regional science community. And we do that in a number of ways through our publishing portfolio, 5 journals, 2 book series, and an e-zine and a blog. The list goes on. Mainly it's through building networks, both at the scale of the research networks, which are formally funded, such as your own, but also we have quite a number now of informal networks. I won't go on. You don't need me to sell the association to you. If you're interested, either email me or please take a look at the website. I would say in relation to the research network that you're all part of, I was absolutely delighted at a personal level that you won the funding. These grants are fiercely competitive. And I was rooting for you from the start. I can say that because I'm not part of the decision-making process and I had no hand in the decision being made. But I'm absolutely delighted that you got the money, and I'm so thrilled to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and join you. I'm really looking forward to your discussions. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you very much, Sally, for that very neat introduction to the work of the RSA and for the notes of confidence and support that you struck at the end. Thank you for rooting for us and for encouraging people from all over the world to consider ways in which they can be part of this very exciting network that you have, and both in terms of academic involvement, but also in terms of the development of projects. So this is extremely welcome. Okay, thank you. In order to move on, and as part of the initial welcome, I think we need to now move on to my project partners. And in the main, it's Professor Ursula Rosenfield from Hanover, from Vietnam in Germany. And the project was based in Hanover, I do beg your pardon. And of course, Mario Sokolowicz from Łódź in Poland, and Agnieszka Gorskawa also from Łódź in Poland. So over to you. And Ursula, would you like to go first?
Yes, I have one slide as an introduction. So I share the screen. There it is. I hope you can all see that. I just wanted to very briefly introduce the team of Leuphana. Our research interests are mainly in innovation and change for sustainability, but and not so much to begin with in citizen entrepreneurship. But when you look at innovation for sustainability, it very much quickly comes to the point that you look at that this is a community question, because if we ask ourselves what kind of future do we want to live in, then this is a local question, and it's a local context, it's local problems and local ideas. And so there are, of course, examples for communities solving such questions. Famous example is Copenhagen, that managed to become a paradise for bikers, and they set a vision as a city, and it evolved into really a paradise for bikers. Or if you look at Linz, a city in Austria, where they build a platform where citizens can help solving everyday problems like bins are overflowing, traffic lights don't work, and so on. A very simple idea, but to engage citizens in trying to solve local problems. So with that in mind, community question, we asked ourselves, well, how does it work? And if you ask for how things work, how does change work? How does innovation work? How can we promote change towards sustainability? Then you quickly come to the question of dealing with mechanisms. And here we looked at, as I said, change for sustainability. So not a particular problem like how do we make the city more bike friendly like Copenhagen, or how do we solve daily problems like Linz, but really asking for a transition of a community. And in that sense, we look at a systemic approach, and later on when we present our methods, how we do that, this is a key aspect already, that we look at a systemic approach and that we look at mechanisms of change for a city. And now maybe as a final remark, why Hanover? Hanover maybe has the image of being very average. It hasn't the glamour maybe of Hamburg or Munich or Berlin, where foreign students might consider to go to. But that's exactly a really good reason why we look at Hanover, because Hanover, the citizens want to change for the citizens, not for the tourists, but for the citizens. And I think that's a very good, from a sustainability point of view and from a citizens entrepreneurship point of view, a very good opportunity to really investigate citizen entrepreneurship for developing a better future for the citizens. So that was my brief introduction, and I'm looking forward to discussing with you how to really do that. And I'm eager to present our methods and then discuss that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ursula. Could I turn to Mario now, please, if I may, for your early introduction? Thank you.
Yes, of course, Jay. Thank you for letting me present our perspective. Unfortunately, I have more than one because I have actually three slides, but I also try to be very brief. What I wanted to present to you as a very beginning, because we are going to of course develop the concept that Ursula presented just 1 second before. So this is something that I left for later. For now, I wanted just to show how it started. I mean, how our network started. Our network started, as Jay mentioned, with the Germany case, but also with Lodz case. With one of the cities in Poland, actually, the city which is third by the size, which is in the very middle of very center of Poland. And it's very specific as a post-industrial city, which is actually, contrary to most European large cities, quite new one, because it really developed in the textile era, in the industrial era in the 19th century. And also it changed quite a lot the structure of the population after the Second World War. And this one, and again, it changed a lot its economic structure in the 90s when the communism fallen, and also the textile industry fallen in the city. And this actually just made a lot of, let's say, problems for our city. And based on this, a lot of let's say bottom-up grassroots initiatives rose to deal with let's say daily living problems in the city. And we have a very specific situation. From one side, the formal urban authorities are doing a lot in terms of big revitalization projects and in terms of very big, let's say, mega events and mega projects, believing they will develop the city quite quickly. But sometimes it is at the cost of very grassroots initiatives, actually. And this is, let's say, a gap that is filled by a lot of NGOs, formal or informal, actually citizens doing a lot in terms of environment protection, protecting the green areas, but also building local identity, etc. As I know that I need to leave a floor for the other people, and I know that the aim of today's meeting is also to make networking and to share what a lot of us is doing around the world. So I'm not developing this problem now, just one city. In case you are interested, I can send you the link to the thing you see on the right side on the screen. Just to know that me and my colleagues in the last year, we just published very briefly what happens in which in terms of economic, spatial and social changes. To sum up, I want to say that what really is the most important from the urban commons point of view, but also what is the field for many activities of urban activists today in Lodz, it's mainly, let's say, even fighting for the greening the city by the occasion of many investments that happen today in Lodz, Also, this is doing like making pressure on formal authorities to do more in terms of air quality and climate change measures. But also there are a lot of activists doing a lot in terms of housing policy. And last but not least, the availability of culture, but not the big culture, like big events, but this culture that is very close at the neighborhood level. And last but not least, I think that what is quite important for us in Lodz, talking about these specific issues just for the city itself, is also that a lot happens actually in terms what local activists do, in terms what authorities do, in terms of the work of academia does, etc. But actually, what I observe, it's still not so much intersectoral cooperation. That is something that we are really also striving for. And last slide is trying to, let's say, to make this context of Lodz a little bit broader, because a lot happens not only in Lodz, of course, in terms of urban commons and citizen entrepreneurship in cities. Actually, some of participants of today's meeting, as we already know, we are from Lodz, but we have colleagues from Wrocław. We have also colleagues from Silesia, from Katowice. Welcome. Also colleagues from Gdynia, which is in the northern part of Poland. And I think what is common for such cities and what is really on topic today for Polish cities is mainly, of course, this climate change and their quality. This is also a lot of things that are being done by urban activists and possibly citizen entrepreneurs in terms of sustainable transport promotion. Also, something that I mentioned in case of Lodz, which is the greening the city, or rather counteracting the greening of the city, but also activating citizens in the urban governance processes, like, I mean, making them more active, more capable, so more entrepreneurial in terms of doing a lot for urban commons. And last but not least, since we have more and more people coming as immigrants from Ukraine today, I think the policies of integrating immigrants are also something that is really exploding today in Polish cities. And many of these initiatives, it is also being made on the level of grassroots organization. So please treat it as a very brief introduction of these first Lodz and more broadly Polish context in terms of citizen entrepreneurship in Polish cities and Polish urban areas. I give the floor for the other colleagues, and in terms of, let's say, more conceptual picture of this, I probably say a few words more later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Mario, for comprehensive introduction to the WUDGE project and its implications. The last but not least, in terms of the projects that we have been working on, is the amazing project in India, which looks at art and cultural heritage as a way of sustaining people's lives, sustaining culture, sustaining the arts, mainly performing arts, music, and a whole range of other crafts-based activities across 3 different parts of India to start with. And could I ask Madhura perhaps just to share a few words about the work that Bangla Natak is doing in terms of catalyzing these activities involving citizens and communities. I know I didn't ask you to prepare slides for this particular show, and you'll be talking separately about methods a little later on, but just a few words by way of an introduction to the Bangla Natak project. Artful.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Mitro, for giving us this opportunity. We are based in Calcutta, in West Bengal in India, and we work all across India. We are a social enterprise, 21 years old, working at the grassroots for cultural entrepreneurship and community empowerment, pro-poor growth, and inclusive development. We use culture-based approaches and methods to bring about that change. and we work on rural cultural entrepreneurship in rural India, which is based on the huge traditional skill base that we have in this country, which is unique and which actually is a very, very large sector, one of the largest sectors providing employment to the rural people. So we started this work. We are a 21 years old organization, but this specific project of ours, Art for Life, it started in 2004 when it was in a very in an early conceptual stage. But through the years, we have learned and we have built on it, and today it is a proven model and it is an accepted model in India for scaling up and for empowering the rural cultural practitioners through cultural entrepreneurship. So that's the main core work of the program Art for Life.
Thank you very much. And I think it's fair to say that there's demonstrable evidence of the impact that it has had on people's lives and their ability to come together as a community, A, in terms of increased income levels, B, in terms of improvement of their habitat, and C, in terms of generating networks globally at the moment now, because and one of the landmarks of this is the International Music Festival, which takes place twice a year in the country, free for all, and it tends to sort of attract more than 1,000 people at each of the settings in 2 different parts of India, which is an astonishing musical event, feat, if you like. And if you want to look at some of the videos on that, please, by all means, go to the website for banganatak.com. Amazing insights into how art and culture changes the way not only people's livelihoods, but people's way of living, not only the heritage, but also the perception of how people who are quite often disenfranchised or lost in remote communities can pick themselves up and actually make a major contribution to economic growth and development and social well-being. Okay, thank you very much all for that as part of our introduction to the projects and where we are coming from, so that everybody is kind of sort of generally aware of why we are involved in this project, what evidence we are working with, and the kind of rationale that guides our thinking behind the project. Could I then move on to the second part of our work today, and that is where we start talking to you in terms of an exploratory mode about the kind of sort of research that we're doing, the research design, and the methods that we're trying to use, at least the broad principles, and how we are thinking of collecting data. Now, essentially, this is a short presentations that we will be making. Well, we have enough time for the presentations for each of us. So I would like perhaps, who would like to go first? Ursula or Marius? Ursula, perhaps. Okay. Since well, let's keep that order going.
Okay.
Ursula first. Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you. In the following, I'm going to describe how we as a team at Leuphana explore citizen entrepreneurship in the city as a system. And the way we explore it can be best described as a systemic social mechanisms approach. And in the following minutes, I'm trying to explain what a systemic social mechanisms approach is in our way of working. And so first, what is our guiding question? So if you apply methods, first, of course, you have to have a research question in order to pick the right research methods for it. And our guiding question is, how to capture and harness citizens' engagement for a more sustainable development. So I already said at the beginning that we were focused on, or we are focused on, how a city can transition towards a more sustainable development and how this implies really citizen entrepreneurship, because it's local context, local problems, local activities. So how can we capture, and not only capture it, meaning inquiring what is happening, but also harness citizens' engagement, which goes beyond capturing, of course. And that also implies that we work together with activists, that we work together with citizens in order to really understand and explore that further to really make a difference. And our approach, I want to divide it in 3 steps to explain our approach. Namely, firstly, I want to talk about actors, levels, and mechanisms. So these are 3 important aspects of our approach. Then the systemism approach, which means that we look at bottom-up and top-down interactions between levels. And thirdly, mechanisms as drivers of change, which is actually in social sciences a very important concept, mechanisms of change. Okay. So first we begin with actors, levels, and mechanisms. Every system has at least 2 levels, namely the level of components and the system level. But it depends on what your research question is, how you define the micro level and the macro level, if you stick to 2 levels. For example, here we say the individual is on the micro level, but of course, for psychologists, for example, psychologists look at the individual as a system and as habits and preferences and sense-making and knowledge and all these elements that come together as components. And then you look at the macro level of the individual, how the individual then behaves. So that would be, for a psychologist, the individual would be the macro level and the knowledge and preferences would be the micro level. On the other hand, if you look at management in fields, in an industry, for example, you could say that the organization is the micro level and the field is the macro level. So the behavior of organizations put together then develop in a field. We, however, we are social scientists, so we don't look at the individual as a system, but we look at the individual as part of the system. And we introduce a meso level where we also talk about organizations being part of the system. And we look at the macro level, the field level, and in our case, the city is the macro level. So we look at the macro level, the system, and we want to look at how the city develops by looking at the context on the macro level and what kind of influence that has on the meso and micro level, and vice versa, how individuals and organizations or activists and initiatives and networks work together, or how their activities influence each other and come together to promote change. And from the social sciences, this is a very well-known figure. It's the so-called Coleman boat, which proposes that if you look at the macro level, so the city is our macro level, and you look at the social situation 1 and you want to have change towards the social situation 2, you can't observe that directly and explain it. To explain it, you really have to look at the micro level. You have to, and that's the boat, the Coleman boat, so that you have to really understand what's happening here. And so this is what we are trying to do. And the second element is the systemism, means that we don't just add up what's happening on the individual level. So individuals pursue certain activities, and this all adds up to the macro level. That would be individualism, which doesn't account for emergence of phenomena. And on the other hand, the other extreme would be holism, that you propose that the macro level is actually all very important, and that the micro level basically is determined by the macro level. That would be holism. But we expressively combine these two and pursue systemism, which means that we are aware that, of course, the macro level, whether it's organizations or the city, the context, has an impact on the micro level, and vice versa. Micro level has an important effect on the macro level. And so we are particularly interested in these interactions between the individual level and the micro level and the macro level. So this is, according to the philosopher of science, Mario Bunge, a very important position you can take as a researcher. If we look at many psychologists who really look into individuals and pertain that individuals are the ones who make an organization tick, then you have researchers that are more on an organizational level and say, well, the organization picks the individual, and people then are formed by the organization. So if you work for Amazon, for example, then in the end you end up as being an Amazon employee, and so you are overpowered by the organization. But Mario Bunge expressively talks about systemism and how these two levels interact, and really you have to look at both levels and the emergence of phenomena that are driven by both levels. Now, the third element that we want to illustrate here is the look for mechanisms. So here again, the Coleman boat is very useful to illustrate that. A famous differentiation of social mechanisms is by Hedstrom and Svedberg, who say that we have situation mechanisms. So individuals, the individual actor is exposed to a certain situation, and that makes the actor rethink, reflect, and so on. And then the actors have a range of options, and they select certain options out of that range and act. And these different actions then combine to affect the macro level. So this is what the Coleman boat means, that you really go through these mechanisms here on the micro level. For example, if you have a city where pollution is really a very big problem, that situation might affect actors in a different way. So some actors might be resigned to it. What can we do? It's important that industry works hard and that we all have money. Other actors, so that would be, the action would be maybe resignation. Then you might have actors who say, no, we have to do something about it. We have to, that might be a journalist writing a damaging article about how the city administration doesn't do anything about it, or you might have actors demonstrating about it. And all these different actions together might eventually lead to a change in legislation that, you have certain cars not being allowed anymore that don't fulfill certain emission norms and so on. So it's this what we are interested in. But we are interested in it in a sense of, as I already said, we introduced the meso level, the relations. We particularly are interested not only in the micro level actors, but also how networks and initiatives combine to transform a system. And of course, we apply that to the city as a system. And you see here that different actors and initiatives and socio-technical systems are all single systems where activities might emerge, but really to have the city transformed, you have to have some kind of combination of all these activities. So we, on the one hand, look at these developments from this social mechanism point of view, but in addition, we also want to look at it not only from that we look at, for example, regional production, how that as a system could be achieved by different actors doing something, and then you have regional production at social situation 1, you don't have it, and in social situation 2, you have a regional production that is very rich, and you can investigate that. We don't only want to do that with regard to one aspect, but we are interested in the city as a whole, as a system, and how these different initiatives and these different networks change, and citizens participate in that. And of course, if citizens become more aware of what they can achieve within a city and how they are being heard and taken seriously and so on, this can change much more than a single initiative. It can have an impact on the city as a whole. And that's what we are looking into. And how do we look into that? We look into that in various ways. We have seminars at our university where we work together with students to and do interviews and desk research, and so interviews with different actors, initiatives, the city administration. We had past seminars that looked at a particular initiative and really went into that. We had an interdisciplinary team 2-3 years ago where we had a research project with artists and looking at how artists can also shape the mood in the city, so to speak. So we are trying to do that also in the future, to really have these different initiatives and networks investigating and jointly working on how you can citizens engage. I come now back to our research question, how you can engage and harness citizen engagement for a better future, for a development for the city, citizens for a better future of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive and analytical take on how you're approaching citizen entrepreneurship using the theoretical lenses of the social mechanism concepts. Thank you very much. Could I move immediately switch over to Mariusz now for his presentation on the approaches that you are taking in Poland. And Maria and Agnieszka, sorry, should have mentioned that.
Sorry for this break. I had to find the unmuting button. I did it. I hope you can hear me now. Okay. Actually, we are not so far away from what Ursula presented. What I would like to ask is that, of course, this citizen entrepreneurship approach combined with urban commons approach needs something, let's say, like middle path, referring to the Buddhism. Middle path between something that is local, something that is more universal, middle path between bottom-up approach and top-down approach. And actually everything we are doing is trying to find this middle path. Actually, this is one thing. And the other thing is to trying to find the most proper way actually to collect the data directly from people being engaged in doing a lot of things on the urban activism level. Before I talk about these methodological issues, I mean how to collect data, I wanted just to remind the most important elements, the most important, let's say, definitions we are dealing with in this project. Actually, Jay at the very beginning presented the first paper we published, and this is an extract from this actually. So on the left side of the slide, we have some kind of decomposition of our understanding of citizen entrepreneurship. One on the right part of the slide, we have the very universal approach to the urban commons or common pool resources issues. And we try to combine these two approaches. So when we are talking about citizen entrepreneurship, these definitions is firstly, of course, it refers to entrepreneurship, but in a very broad view. So it refers not only to enterprises, but actually to citizens at the very level of their activities. What must be fulfilled also for saying that this definition works is that the efforts that are being made concentrate on collective benefits. So here we have this common good, actually. And what we also need is some kind of hybridity that I will refer later to, which is understood as a, let's say, sectoral hybridity, like different kinds of organization. As I promised, I will go back to these issues. Of course, this kind of entrepreneurship is based not on a single man entrepreneur or single woman entrepreneur. It's about communities, it's about people and communities primarily. So we need some kind of community. It's the same actually as the approach that you can see on the graph on the right side of the slide. When you have common pool resource, you must have these resources which are shared, of course. We must have some kind of joint benefits that are perceived, but we also need some kind of community of commoners actually, who are dealing with these resources. So we are talking and combining this urban commons approach with citizen entrepreneurship approach. We strictly underline that these community issues, that the cooperation on the local level, on the neighborhood level is very important as some kind of, let's say, added value to what happens with urban common goods. We also add to this that, of course, citizen entrepreneurship doesn't have to be a, let's say, rocket science. It is very often based on a very modest improvements, but these improvements are, let's say, good enough to improve the quality of life in the city, to improve one of the elements of urban policies, etc., etc. So even very modest improvements can be maybe entrepreneurial. And of course, this kind of approach also has its roots in the crisis of the classically perceived public sector and private sector in terms of what happens on the self-government level, like cutting budgets on public goods, but also what happens in the private sector in terms of its neoliberal pressure for only short-term profits. So because we know that this kind of crisis happens, we see also that very often what is the response to this kind of crisis in both public and private sector actually happens on the very local level in many urban, very often also rural areas. And very often they take the form of entrepreneurial activity. Decomposing this kind of definition, we are trying to have, as I already mentioned, at least 4 main elements based on which we will try to collect a data, actually. First is the citizen engagement. So it means that if you are talking about citizen entrepreneurship, there must be a sense of common good within, I will already repeat it, within some kind of community. It must to be community-based and there must be a sense of common good. And this gives this citizen engagement based on some kind of proximity, which is geographical proximity, but also cognitive proximity. We need some kind of locally embedded social capital, and we need some kind of reciprocity, like not only profit-oriented activities, but also giving something for something within this community. So this is how we try to understand the citizen engagement, the first element of this definition. The second element is a collective efficacy, which is, in our opinion, also very often territorially embedded. So we have some kind of norms and rules within a community, but they are actually made by this community on the local level. The third element of this decomposition is citizen capabilities. This is something that we perceive as an effect that we desire. We can say that what is the reason of this citizen entrepreneurship approach, which is locally embedded, community-oriented, and concentrated around some common good, some common benefits. It's something that the community that gathers its efforts around dealing with common goods in some kind of entrepreneurial approach gives the whole, not only the leaders, but the whole community citizen capabilities. And here we refer to the Amartya Sen approach on capabilities. And last but not least, probably the most complicated, but also we think important, is this institutional perspective, which is this hybridity I already mentioned, which is a sense of added value derived from combinatorial approach, from, let's say, cooperation between many sectors. I mean, we know that we have private sector, we have public sector, we have third sector, and actually they have different rationale. And what we really need actually is to make a combinatorial approach. So to take all the most important advantages from each of them. And this is actually mentioned as a last one, but probably even, maybe it is even the most crucial actually from the point of view of, let's say, efficacy of dealing with common goods in the citizen entrepreneurship approach terms. This what you can see now, it's actually even further decomposing of what I presented here on this slide. So we have first three of them: citizen engagement, collective efficacy, and citizen capabilities. Trying to decomposing it into more direct questions, we think that it can be to some extent, let's say, cumulative. I mean, let's start maybe from the very first, from the citizen engagement. When we talk about the citizen engagement, probably we must start with very basic physical concentration of some people who start to gather around a common challenge, common good, common challenges, common problem in a given area, in some rural community, on some part of urban community. And this is very beginning. If it starts working, probably the second step is this community emerges. Some people start to express it more explicitly. They know for what they gather and they join their effort in the entrepreneurial way. Then let's say possibly the strongest, let's say, stage of citizen engagement is very strong established community, when there is a common sense of belonging among, let's say, hypothetically everyone. When we talk about collective efficacy, which is in the middle of this picture, again, at a very basic level, there are just some agreements and some rules how the resource is used. But generally, these agreements can be built, they can be even given, let's say, from the public sector, for example, the self-government in some kind of formal regulations. But the way further is actually when these agreements are being made collectively by this community themselves, itself. So this is like a step further. And if the group is capable of maintaining the common good itself, actually, it is the most, let's say, advanced stage of collective efficacy. And last but not least, when we are talking about the citizen capabilities, the same. We start from the very beginning. So the basic level is that there are some leaders, let's call them first movers, who emerge, who start advocating for some kind of urban common good. Let's it be the problem with poverty within the community, the problem of lack of cultural institutions working in the community, the problem of lack of greenery, of places to play for children, of places for elderly to take care with health, etc., etc. However, if these leaders are able to, let's say, make injection and make the other members of the community to work together and attract new citizens, this is the step further. And last but not least, in the same way, like the regular members of the community are capable of to take actions themselves, the new ideas come only not only from the leaders but also from the other members of the community. Is like the very advanced stage of this element. And this is something that we will try to use for the next hour of our meeting. So please remember this slide. Maybe we'll be able to use it later for our discussion, because we want to give floor to you as urban activist and talk with you about this. So I will try to go back to this slide. I hope it will be helpful to, let's say, crystallize our approach. The last of this is hybridity. Just to remind, hybridity is of course based on this sectoral approach that we can, this is the very common triangle you can see on the right side. Some activities can be profit and non-profit. So depending on this, we have market initiatives or community or state initiatives. If you have public-private division, we have state versus communities and markets. And of course, if we have formal versus informal division, we have community, which is more informal, and formal regulations like state or formal enterprises in the market. So what we really are seeking for is, again, going to the middle of this triangle to make this combinatorial approach also with this cumulative approach. So firstly, the action may be monosectoral, maybe it comes only from some urban activists like NGO, like community, but when it starts to be transformed into cooperation between 2 sectors, 3 sectors, more actors actually, this again we have this advancement in our approach, and this is also something to remember. So to sum up, this is the first 3. So citizen engagement, collective efficacy, and citizen capabilities cut into smaller parts as like questions to discuss later on, and the same with the last, which is the hybridity. And now, if you let me, I will give the floor to Agnieszka Kurczewska. She will continue this way. This is like 3 slides left to show how we try to use it, trying to transform the questions I just presented into maybe even not answers, but at this stage, the questions, how to ask the questions and how to collect the data actually in a way that we want to, because we want to engage actually the urban activists in collecting the data themselves. So the last 3 slides is about that. So please, Agnieszka, I can stay with the presentation and change the slides.
Yes, please, Mariusz, stay with the presentation. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. The intention of this workshop is to discuss methodology. So let's move towards it. I must say that this part of the presentation will be quite general. Okay, it's just 3 slides, as Mariusz said. It might be a little bit general for researchers, but during this workshop, we do want to invite practitioners into our academic world and get you involved. So let's treat this part of presentation as some kind of introduction to our methodological challenges. What I also want to stress at the beginning is that we know what we are interested in. Yes, this is the citizen entrepreneurship phenomenon. We want to understand its uniqueness. We want to understand its nuances. We have some initial research questions, as both Mariusz and Ursula presented. But next to theoretical contribution, we are interested in providing some practical implications, helping practitioners in their activities. So we have double goals with this project. So knowing the phenomenon, citizen entrepreneurship, and having some propositions at this stage regarding theoretical frameworks presented also by Mariusz, the biggest challenge remains to find an appropriate methodology and start actually our empirical part of the study. Why we talk about methodology with you? I think it will even become more clear with the last slide. What is also important to stress is that methodology is always particularly difficult, particularly challenging when the phenomenon itself, this phenomenon under investigation, is relatively novel. That's because there are not that many other empirical studies to follow and to refer to. We have to be innovative on both levels, on theoretical level but also on methodological level. In general, we say that the phenomenon itself should dictate the method. We need to choose the procedure that is most suitable with respect to our research questions, with our interests. So what actually we should do at this stage of the project, of the study? We should make some methodological choices, and these methodological choices concern research strategies. So what kind of type of reasoning we should apply, whether we should approach data inductively, deductively, or abductively, what method to choose, method that suits theory and suit our goals of the project, what kind of informants and cases we should select, what kind of techniques of collecting data we should decide on. So there are many questions that we need to answer in the nearest time of our project. Next slide, please. In general, in our research team, I think we agree that the qualitative approach should be more appropriate for our study. Why? In general, again, qualitative studies help to develop concepts. They help to understand social phenomena in natural settings, with emphasis on the meanings, experiences, views of all participants. So actually, it suits the nature of our phenomenon. As I said, we are in a very explorative stage of our study. So we aim to understand these nuances of the citizen entrepreneurship in order to build some theoretical framework. So the qualitative studies qualitative study approach makes sense. We are also aware that citizen entrepreneurship is highly context-dependent phenomenon, and qualitative studies are actually very sensitive to it. And so what kind of choice we have in terms of qualitative research methods? Actually, quite many. I don't want to go into details because I'm also seeing the clock and the time is running. But we can choose between ethnographic methods, grounded theory, phenomenology, discourse analysis, case study. This is kind of a classics in qualitative studies. Just to very briefly, because maybe not all of you are familiar with all these methods, and very, very briefly, and sorry for that it's only briefly, but the in general, ethnography provides kind of a thick description of the cultural phenomenon under study. The grounded theorists, they inquire about how social structures and processes influence how things are accomplished. Phenomenologists, they usually ask questions about lived experiences as contrasted with some more abstract interpretations. Discourse analysts, they explored how knowledge, meaning, identities, social goods are negotiated and constructed through language in use. And finally, case study as a method generates more deep, in-depth, multi-faceted understanding of some more complex issues, usually in real life context. And we have quite, please next slide. It's already, yeah. There is quite a lot of tools we can select from. So after choosing the method, we should also select the tool. And here are the typical tools that we use in in the qualitative studies. It's case study, so the case study can be both the tool and the method. Personal experience, life stories, surveys, diaries, in-depth interviews, observational, historical, interactional, and visual text, videos, studies of archival, secondary data, interactive workshops. So there is a whole variety. Of course, we have to select one, or if we have some triangulation, two tools, I think maximum 3. That's the common. And next slide now. Yep. And so this is the general picture of the qualitative study. And this is the slide which I was announcing earlier. So why we ask now you? I think that we are very much inspired by the current trend in methodology, which is called participatory action research, PAR. It is an approach that values participation and action by members of communities affected by that research. Therefore, if we aim to study citizen entrepreneurship, it makes a lot of sense. Actually, it is like it was created for citizen entrepreneurship. But first, what are the characteristics, the main characteristics of this approach? Firstly, it is addressing research questions and problems that are important for those who participate. So here, the practitioners, they act also as co-researchers. So now you probably all understand why we ask you about methodological choices. The second characteristic is that is the collaborative research and collective inquiry. So I think we can even say that we can treat research results as commons. So again, it seems that this approach particularly suits the topic. It is based on experiences. That's why we ask you, and so we involved practitioners in this project. And it focuses on social change and changing the world. So it's not only about the research per se, but it's about having some impact for practice, which is equally, if not even more, important. Therefore, after this very brief and general presentation, but we would like to hear your voice and sometimes intuition, how this approach suits the topic and how to approach actually the topic of citizen entrepreneurship, how we can enrich our understanding of citizen entrepreneurship. What could you advise us how to touch this phenomenon? So I know that I ask more questions than probably we have time to, but we really count on your opinions, on your views and suggestions, because that's a part of this process. Thank you.
If I may add something also at the very end, I would like to stress, we both would like to stress that, of course, the methods we can use for collecting the data are quite, there's a wide range of them. That's the first one. The second, Agnieszka mentioned that we prefer qualitative approach. Of course, it doesn't mean that we don't like quantitative approach. It's also important, but of course, we think that actually, if you are talking about urban commons, there are four maybe projects of mapping the commons. We can find it in internet, but it's very beginning. In terms of citizen entrepreneurship, actually, there are not many research. Probably ours is the first one, actually. So there's a very beginning to start with, and we think that starting with getting data, really like grassroots data from people directly engaged in commoning, in citizen entrepreneurship, it's very good starting point for, maybe it will be also inspiring for the other research. Maybe we are able to create a new network in the future also to make this research more differ. At this stage, we think that this is kind of phenomenon that we would like really to develop together with you, maybe even starting today after the break. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario and Agnieszka, for another comprehensive account using the commons approach, and particularly the urban commons approach, to looking at how we can do research on the subject of citizen entrepreneurship. We are going to move on to another type of approach, which we loosely define as a citizen science approach. And I think before I ask Madhura to talk about the application of that in the Indian context, I'm going to talk again very briefly about what I mean by the citizen entrepreneurship approach. I think you will find a lot of commonalities across each of the approaches that we are talking about. And the citizen science, what we are drawing from is primarily citizen science, which is now a pretty well-established mode and method of doing research in the sciences, in the physical and the other exploratory sciences, but also increasingly in citizen economics and in citizen archaeology, where I think citizen approach has been lagging behind is primarily in the wider field of applied economics and perhaps in business, entrepreneurship, innovation, etc. But it is certainly a developing kind of sort of methodology, a developing framework for design, which is what is emerging from that. And all I'm going to do is to just highlight some basic principles behind that. The quote that I offer there, it's that if you really want to do science in the proper way, and that is to produce reliable data and information, then it has to be usable by everyone. It is no point in generating data and generating outcomes if it's only restricted to within the academic community and it's rather abstract or modus operandi. So that will include scientists, policymakers, and the public, and as part of an open system of peer review. So not peer review, which is simply restricted to academics. Academics validate each other, but we don't get our work validated in the world outside. And neither are we capable in many respects to validate the experiences and the outputs of people working in the commons outside academia. So it's applying the peer review process in conventional science, but making it part of a much wider audience of interaction. All projects that have been carried out to date demonstrate some authentic scientific objectives, but at the same time, they realize that significant social outcomes can be derived from that process. A good example in the US is the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Projects, which empowers individuals living in very poor neighborhoods to collect information on the air quality and health data, documenting the degree to which air pollution affects local residents. And this is a wonderful example of scientists working with people who are probably more knowledgeable about the air pollution effects in their neighborhood than the scientists themselves. So their participation becomes extremely significant in the whole process. Another one in the Congo in Africa, where in cooperation with University College London, they leverage the data capture capabilities of smartphones. How do you use smartphones, particularly amongst people who are perhaps not that literate, to document, again, environmental impact of routine kind of sort of destructive activities such as poaching and illegal logging? So citizens become directly involved, not in some abstract opinion on how that could be stopped, but actually using that expertise with a view to engaging in something which has social impact. And one of the reasons why it has become so popular is that it's cutting across issues around climate change, invasive species, conservation biology, ecological restoration, water quality, population ecology, and all kinds of monitoring. And perhaps one of the things that people are beginning to realize with the advent of our desperate epidemiological crisis, COVID-19, is the extent to which you need to work with citizens and victims sometimes of COVID-19 and others in order to address critical issues, not only about how you vaccinate them and how you protect them, but how also you recover from the processes, whether because of long COVID or whether because of other psychological factors that might affect people's lives. And the reason why there is this growing popularity is dependent on three factors. One is ubiquity. In other words, lots of technical tools are now available to us, particularly about gathering data, mobile computing, internet, mobile phones, etc. There's a realization among professional scientists that the public resource base is extremely valuable, not only in terms of their volunteering capability, but also in terms of the skill sets that they have, and sometimes the computational power, and even the contribution that they can make through crowdfunding. So it's a financial resource base for research. And of course, the growing importance of outreach and impact and public accountability of our research, which taxpayers inevitably ask the question, well, what is it that these guys are doing with all our money in terms of public research or not? And then, so, I mean, that's essentially the same slide put in a slightly different way. And broadly speaking, when we talk about citizen science collaboration, we must recognize that there are at least three ways in which citizen science suggests you can collaborate. One is at the contributory level, which is basically as users of products, because simply by generating data using social media and all sorts of other means, we are contributing to that research. Problem is, it's never recognized. A more collaborative approach where we work as users become producers. For example, when people work on fancy software or even the development of new cars or other products, the use of, for example, 3D printing, etc., and to actually do a kind of prototyping for big organizations, etc. But the one that we are really interested in is in co-creative work, which is not just contributory or collaborative, but where you are actually not just being engaged as users and producers, but as decision makers. So you are going back a step and actually saying, well, this is essentially what we want to create and develop with multiple stakeholders involved. So that is the kind of sort of broad principle around which citizen science, a citizen science approach is utilized. And I'm therefore going to ask Madhura now to see how some of that is actually taking place in practice in the context of the project that we are involved in India. So Madhura, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Minter. I will just share my screen. Can you see and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll speak a very practitioner's language to start with. We introduced ourselves, but quickly we work for inclusive and sustainable development, and these are our credentials. We have been working since 2000. So I think a little bit of context is required for setting our research methods in a way that I am able to communicate why we do research and how we do research and how we apply it. So Art for Life, the program that we mentioned, I have already explained what it is, but I'll come to that in detail. But the point is, it is about addressing social inclusion and poverty alleviation through development of grassroots creative enterprise based on traditional art and craft. Now here we are talking about creative entrepreneurship, cultural entrepreneurship, and mostly that is rural in India. So it is not urban, it is rural, and the rural population or the rural beneficiaries with whom we are working come with their challenges, which is illiteracy, lack of formal education, marginalization, caste, lots of other things. So it is very, very complex. I would also like to touch upon, though we are talking about citizen entrepreneurship and the things around it, because we are talking about research, I would also like to touch upon the three more sort of verticals, if I may sort of distribute our work that way. One is communication for development. We use cultural and digital media for public education and empowering the community. We essentially started using social theater for development, to create an environment of easy community education and community action. We do proper projects of evaluation of government programs and situation analysis research and social audits. And we also gather evidence for influencing policy, which again takes us from the grassroots or the micro to the macro level. Now, the other three areas are important for Art for Life, because development, community development or social development is very, very interdisciplinary, and the factors are all linked. So we cannot really say that, okay, this is a livelihood project and that is a non-livelihood project, or a health project, or a communication project, or an awareness project, because with the kind of beneficiaries that we work with and within the conditions that we work with, all these merge and integrate. So often we use all these areas of work together to make an impact. But another very important factor which everybody touched upon is local culture is a very cross-cutting factor and an extremely important factor in designing research or interventions. Now, everything in the community's behavior, their way of life, their life choices are integrally linked to their local culture. So any kind of threat to that culture or that community behavior or that social practice can be difficult to handle in terms of community-based research. Now, for this, we undertake socioeconomic research, strategy research, and evaluation studies. So I think I'd like to start with role of research in our work, which is not particularly purely academic, but it is never a standalone activity for us. It is always linked to some kind of on-ground action or strategy or impact. And the question that we ask, and we find that this question is also in the discourse a lot, is whose agenda are we fulfilling? We are a social enterprise. So we work in the grassroots, and for that we have to get some funds. So the funder may be the government, the funder may be an INGO, the funder may be a big donor, corporate, anything. But finally, the question is, whose agenda are we fulfilling? Because the program that comes with a lot of broad indicators, but they are mostly completely delinked from the actual community level measurable indicators that can actually again lead to the macro level understanding that the larger program is coming with. So broadly, we use community-based research and community-led research, essentially in the ethnographic method. And we also combine it with secondary and desk research. So we also do very intensive secondary desk research, because there are lots of academic and research work already existing on various issues that we deal with. So that gives us a good platform to actually design the community-based or community-led research. And that leads us to relevant project design and implementation, identifying the right stakeholders. As in this context, everything is multi-stakeholder approach. So it is very, very important to identify the right stakeholders for that particular kind of intervention or project or whatever we are trying to achieve. And identifying community leaders who are the initiators who will move the project, and identify relevant measurable indicators. Now, the other broad area of research is basically for assessment. So we have a baseline, we have a situation analysis, we develop a relevant and a specific project. Then at different phases of that project, I will not say end, because I mean, for us, a project end means it's actually a funded project that ends, but our work with community never ends. It is a continuous process. So at different phases, we assess the impact of the project. And here we include our impact assessment and learning, community speaking about successes and challenges, that is their own life stories in their voices with their interpretation. We build evidence for policy advocacy. This is obviously linked to secondary research on existing policies and the kind of data we can use or we can show to influence that policy or change that policy, or sort of emphasize the need for a specific policy or program. And definitely scaling up interventions when we show measurable indicators based evidence. That is the time that there is a possibility of actually mainstreaming a project or a program, or the government scaling up the program for larger benefits. So here we do a mix of external evaluation. So there's always an external evaluator coming in to sort of get rid of the bias that people have doing the project. And we do field survey, ethnographic study, field documentations, and that leads to an impact assessment against the baseline indicators at different phases, as I said. So the data collection methods that we use are observation, focus group, in-person, in-depth interviews. We carry an interview schedule, we structure it, they are sometimes unstructured. Ethnography is the method, the overall method. Case study is the overall method. And theater for development. I have included theater for development because we have used theater as an innovative tool for actually researching sensitive community issues such as trafficking, human trafficking, HIV/AIDS, child marriage, which otherwise is very difficult to acquire from the community. How we represent the data is definitely empirical summaries of quantitative data and textual narrative reports, but also audiovisuals, photographs, blog articles. So this is our way of continuously collating the data, not only for building evidence, but also to document the entire process so that we can go back to it, learn, and then build upon it to move further. Definitely community consensus, confidentiality as necessary, and standard ethical guidelines are always maintained, whatever data collection method or whatever data representation we choose. So I will just quickly go into the programs. Art for Life, which is the main program we have been talking about, which is the entrepreneurship program. I have tried to categorize the activities because I will come to how we measure them. One part of the activity, because we work on cultural entrepreneurship, one part of the activity is a detailed research on the various cultural forms, that is actually the cultural mapping in terms of geography, in terms of community, demography, and then about the actual performing arts or the crafts forms we work with, the processes, the indigenous knowledge that exists, which are mostly oral, which are never documented. So it just goes on from generation to generation. So in documenting that knowledge, identifying and documenting about the community legends, and also finding out and documenting the lost traditions or the less practiced traditions that are dying. So there are lots of, say, steps in a dance form which are not used anymore, or maybe there is in a folk painting called Patachitra, they used to use natural colors. So documenting that knowledge is very important for training future generations and also as archival materials. So that is one part. In the other part, it is mainly capacity building. Capacity building for skill transmission, direct market linkage, institution building. Institution building is mainly targeted towards bringing in a collective, a collective approach towards the program that we are doing. So our program is never individual based, it is always a community or a collective based. Cultural exchange, collaboration, business skill, infrastructure development. So all these create the capacity for entrepreneurship. And finally, we create cultural entrepreneurs who take their business forward and become better off economically, socially, culturally. Now, to give you an idea of what we measure. Now, these are also indicators that we have also learned over time, and we have sort of evolved also, because as we understand, there is no standard framework for social development program indicators. The standard framework that therefore we use is the Sustainable Development Goals framework, because that's the global framework and that is a language that the world understands. So because our research also influences policies and programs, it is important that we fit that into the SDG framework. But what do we measure? In economic indicators, these are not exhaustive. These are just sort of examples. Income, size of business, markets, production efficiency, standard of living, number of entrepreneurs, number of job workers. Because if the number of entrepreneurs increase, then the lateral sort of business expansion increase. And that is how the enterprises can actually include more and more people in the employment and change the overall socioeconomic condition of those communities, villages, and at the larger level. Skill upgradation and professionalization. Now there are various data collection methods, various ways in which we collect these data. Social indicators, even when we are doing an entrepreneurship project, because they are becoming economically empowered, they are starting to look at their social status, their social condition, because they are interacting with the outer world more, because they have more exposure, because they have an aspiration. The other social indicators come in naturally into the process. So we have children's education, girls' education specifically, health, sanitation, and women's participation in the economic activity, which is a big factor. Then we have well-being indicators, then confidence, decision-making power, exposure, recognition, pride, happiness, and collective resilience. Collective resilience is something that has come up more recently in our sort of vocabulary of indicators, and I'll come to why. Environment indicators. Environment indicators, here we look at village-based creative industries, which are sustainable, environmentally sustainable, because they are based on local resources. They are locally cultivated, grown resources, and that entire ecosystem is local. And when the local village economies grow, the out-migration for unsafe and unsecure menial jobs to cities stop. So all those impact environment indicators as well. So you can see some percentages on the right and the specific sustainable development goals. If you want to get in detail, we can always come back. Action research project. This is very interesting, and taking from what Professor Mitro was just explaining, that this is a project we did on applying heritage sensitive intellectual property and marketing strategies. This was done in partnership with Coventry University. And this is also part of Art for Life program, because in our country, there is no copyright rule for traditional art and craft. And there are many complexities, which is why it is not possible to have a copyright rule or have legal ramifications for the issues. So just to sort of briefly summarize the thing, what we did was, it was the concept of intellectual property, the concept of how to build in authenticity and sensitivity in the marketing strategies for the traditional craftspersons to maximize their markets and profits and get the premium value that they otherwise don't. This was a project which was an action research project. So what in the whole method of the project was co-designing the strategies. So with the communities, the process was facilitated, but the communities themselves actually identified what their indigenous knowledge is, what is the speciality, what is the uniqueness, what is the authenticity, what are the barriers, what are the difficulties that they face, and through this research method, many examples have come up which we did not know earlier, because the community never identified that earlier as an exploitation of copyright. And based on that, strategies were developed, marketing strategies were developed, which were co-designed with them. Now, this whole thing was basically targeted to creating a strategy that is feasible for the community and which the community will adopt and practice. So otherwise, there is no point actually having the research, doing the research, and not being able to actually impact the community action. So this was a co-designed project, and this is, I mean, we still sort of evaluate the project, but the project is over, and there is now an ethical toolkit as, again, a common good for the sector, because legally it is very difficult to do anything for the rural communities. Communication for development, why I have included this in research is that often we see that communication in rural areas, in areas who do not have formal education, who are not literate, communication remains delinked from actual need. So theater is a fantastic tool. Social theater is a fantastic tool, and it is not new. It has been there globally for many decades. That identifying deep-seated myths and misconceptions, understanding local preferences, perceptions, identification of the target groups as well as the local resources, and bottlenecks in the service delivery or in whatever service or product that the community is trying to get at. Now, community participation and community, so these social theaters are done by local theater groups or community theater groups. So capacities are built by us, by specialists, and community participation. What happens when local community participates is their acceptance is very high, language is not an issue, cultural nuances can be quickly changed as per the local cultural nuances. So the communication is never like an outsider coming in and trying to tell them what to do. It is on the principle of equal footing, where we are taking the community knowledge and using that to give them back some kind of information that they did not have earlier. So how do we measure? Outreach details, definitely outreach, that is numbers and awareness level, but we also measure community action. Because unless that loop is closed, unless they access entitlements or their vulnerability is reduced or they access service delivery, this whole sort of process of getting the data from the field through the theater-based campaigns or projects does not hold good. So what is done is, after every show, data is collected, those data are collated, and parallel to the community-based campaigns, that data is taken back to the government, to the local stakeholders, to the local administration, because that data helps the local administration actually to take decisions about improving the service delivery. Participatory research with community, this is also something that we talked about. We've done that in many areas, but this is specifically on issues like human trafficking and child marriage. So this was a project where the adolescent girls themselves mapped existing vulnerabilities, learning to identify what a vulnerability is, learning to identify the village resources that exist, the social safety schemes that exist, and then actually themselves creating a roadmap and a strategy for their own empowerment and own development. We just facilitate the process, we train them, we show them ways of doing things, but it is their, finally, it is their decision as to how they take this forward after understanding the vulnerabilities of the vulnerabilities within which they live. So we create an youth agency, and then that youth agency actually takes the action forward. This is another interesting approach where I just try to give you a sort of a range of different things. We did a study on gender responsiveness in school education in rural India. But what we did after that was we took back the research findings to the beneficiaries in the form of sensitization and educational tools. So we actually did a gender inclusive curriculum, which was then sort of transferred to the teachers and the children in innovative ways, so that whatever are the findings we can actually take back the data and the findings to the beneficiaries and use it for the benefit and the development of the already relatively informed beneficiary community. So we also do, as I said, evaluation and social audit projects. Here, just one interesting thing I would like to highlight is we did a women's safety audit in 6 tea gardens of Assam. Now, these are all tea garden workers. They are also like they do business and everything, but they are rural people. And there was something like conducting exploratory walks to assess the situation of the vulnerable areas. Now, the women who are vulnerable themselves did the exploratory walks to assess the situation. And that is how collectively the measurement indicators were actually defined, keeping the larger sort of research framework in place. So there are some of the measurement indicators which are listed on the right. Then we have done, say, government program evaluation, midday meal programs. Again, this is again an action-oriented program where we are evaluating the government program, starting from the program process to benefits to even fund utilization, to see how that can feed back into development of the program. So, and finally, all this data, all this evidence, it is mainly most of the evidence in the form of either audiovisuals or reports or audios or any other or blog articles. They are all available free. So all these are shared on the websites, on YouTube, on portals for free, so that becomes sort of an evidence building tool for the entire sector. And so we have been, because we work in the grassroots, we work on ground, we are connected to the community directly, we have been working on policy and program strategies for a long time with state governments, with UNESCO, with UNWTO, other national and international networks, and through various journals. Now, what I would like to, this is my last slide, and what I would like to highlight here is the COVID-19 situation and how sort of evidence helps or enables in actually understanding certain critical things. So during the entire phase of COVID-19, from March 2020 till date, we have had a direct outreach, and by outreach I mean phone, Zoom, WhatsApp interactions with around 7,500 to 10,000 of our beneficiaries out of the 40,000 that we work with in Art for Life. And these community interactions have happened continuously, and we have been able to do it. We don't get any grant for research. We don't get any money for actually reaching out or anything. These are all part of our ongoing projects or our interventions. And because we have different project teams who are connected to these communities, who are comfortable with these communities, they have continuously interacted with the community. And there have been on and off on-ground data gathering, which many of them are anecdotal, many of them are very micro, but it has given an understanding, because we have the background of these communities in terms of the different phases of development and concrete research data. It has been easier for us to sort of analyze even these on and off data gathering in that context. And there are three things that have come up in a big way, which I will like to mention. One is, in our sector, we have been promoting and propagating for the role of strengthening local economies based on traditional skills for a very, very long time. But it has really not been taken up as a mainstream sector by the economic policy. So it is always culture. Culture is something different, and economic thing is something different, and social thing is again something completely different. So, but what happened was, during this interaction, a few things that came up in a very, very sort of very strongly are the indicators for sustainability and well-being. We talk about well-being, but how do we now, with the pandemic situation, well-being as an indicator is, I think, coming up more and more for on-ground interventions. And I'm not referring only to us, for the entire sector. And what we found was that during this pandemic, the community as an entity, because we work with the community as an entity talked about collective resilience. They talked about collective resilience and being better off because they are within a community where there is social cohesion, where there is social capital, and where each person is supporting the other within that system. So this collective resilience became an extremely important indicator for showing how the pandemic is impacting them and how they are addressing pandemic. Obviously, their economic situation is very, very, very bad, and it has gone even worse with the continuation. But then there has been a very strong emotional resilience and community resilience, which have taken them forward, obviously with also support going from us based on the data that we have gathered. The second is realizing the importance of building local economies vis-a-vis the urban economy. And especially that has come up in a big way because of the situation of the migrant workers that happened here. And the other interesting thing is local tourism. Now, tourism is also one of the industries of these cultural entrepreneurs or the cultural enterprises. And we have been promoting local tourism, again, sustainable tourism, local tourism, responsible tourism locally for a very, very long time. But it has never caught the attention of the sector of the government. But this time, in the first wave, after the COVID scenario was settling down a little bit, at that time, tourism was one of the biggest hit sectors. And when it wanted to sort of, bounce back, the Incredible India, Government of India, and the West Bengal government tourism department did a huge campaign on the rural cultural hubs that we have created and which we have tried to link with them for a very, very long time. Now that became their fundamental resource for campaign, and the kind of campaign that they have done, it has benefited these areas and these people hugely, but we would never have been able to get that kind of money to do that campaign. So the mileage it has created is so huge, but then it took a pandemic for the people or the sector or the department to realize that this is also a very strong enterprise, local enterprise. So these are sort of, and obviously with all the activities that have happened, there has been a continuous evidence building and data generation, which has helped us to actually convince or mobilize or advocate for these areas. Finally, to sum up.
Madhura, yeah, if you could sum it up now, please.
Yeah. Finally, to sum up, this is the way of research that we use is non-threatening. So it's easy to make inroads into the community. It is participatory, which we talked about. It is transparent. So this is fundamental. We build community trust and relationship, which is extremely important for the kind of data that we gather and for the actual real ground level data. And the fact that we consider them as equal stakeholders, co-designers, co-participants in the process builds the community ownership, which actually helps us exit and sustains the programs in the long run. So that's where I stop. Sorry for taking a little bit more time, but yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Madhura, for this very rich and powerful kind of sort of illustration of how research can be done on the ground, involving activists, involving participants. And I think one of the most exciting parts of it was that you yourself would consider yourself not just as an agent of the social enterprise, but in the process, you are an activist and included. And there's a very good contingency of colleagues and friends from Bangladesh present here today. And I'm sure they're watching and observing every word that you speak. So, and if at any point in time they wish to raise any issues, please feel free to do that. I think I know most of them, and they're all amazing guys who are actively involved not only in the creation of the social enterprise and its development, but in the kind of research that Madhura was demonstrating together with citizens on the ground. So you also saw in that example kind of the confluence that we were talking about between doing academic research and more participatory research at the ground level with practitioners, with activists. And that was a nice way of illustrating that, covering many of the questions around participatory, commons-based and social mechanism-based research activity that we have alluded to. Okay, I think we're going to stop now for 10 minutes, if I may, if we can. But before we do that, could I just ask Andre to show his face, please? Ah, Andre Kohn, right. I should have brought him in earlier. My apologies for that. But this is as good a time as any to do that, because Andre has a few words to share about how you could use this 10-minute interval, which we call it as a networking interval. Of course, you're very welcome to use it as a comfort break. But Andre will tell you the technology that is being applied to collect some of your thoughts and questions, etc. And that is going to be applied not just in the networking session, but in the two sessions that follow immediately after the break. So Andre, please, would you kindly explain what you're up to?
Yes, thank you very much. So I just posted a link into the chat, which is an Etherpad, which all of you may use if you want to. And the purpose of it is to collect questions on the topic that you may have. And it's very easy to use. So basically, it's just a shared document. And you can choose a username at the top right corner. But if you want to remain anonymous, I think that is okay as well. And basically, this is just an easier way to collect and to manage the questions that might come up in the upcoming session. Yeah, so feel free to post any questions in there, preferably under the small text I already prepared. And thank you very much.
That's great. And Andre, it's correct to say that you're going to be around to monitor that and support anyone who might get stuck or whatever, somebody who is perhaps not comfortable with using it in any form. And they could
yes,
check,
definitely.
So
feel free to ask me any questions about it.
Andre is a wonderful young man with whom you can ask questions. And I have this experience because he was I think, the first guinea pig on the first ever program on citizen entrepreneurship that we introduced, an accredited program in Leuphana University in Germany. And he was one of its outstanding stars. So he's here continuing in that citizen entrepreneurship vein and helping us out in the process. So a big cheer to him. Okay, 10-minute break, please. I reckon the time is 6 minutes past 3 in UK, and that means 6 minutes past 4 in Europe, and 6 minutes past or 36 minutes past, I think 7 in India, and or whatever time it is else in other parts of the globe. But if we could give ourselves just 10 minutes and come back in 10 minutes, we can start the next session, the penultimate session of the day. Thank you very much, and we can take a quiet break now, or just converse and network in the best way possible.
Yeah, so, I mean, what is your question?
Yeah, sorry, the question got a little bit extended. Are you enabling people to be entrepreneurs as citizens, or are you facilitating a space, or are you the entrepreneur, or are you the one doing entrepreneurship, and then the people are participating as co-creators, or are they the entrepreneurs? So okay. Are they? Yeah.
So no, we are not entrepreneurs, but we call ourselves a social enterprise because the money that comes in is actually fed back into the social or the collective good for these projects. So we are an organization which does consultancy, which does other projects, but then the funds essentially that we earn are put back into the community development, and that's the overall value system. Now, as far as the Art for Life program is concerned, we enable them to become entrepreneurs. Why? Because there are 2-3 factors which have sort of led us to this kind of a program. When we started working for community education and awareness, and when we were in the rural areas for days, for months, we realized that poverty is a very important factor which influences and which leads to many other social problems. So how do we address poverty? This whole thing, again, sort of taking an innovative turn, this understanding and this sort of idea, I can say, came in, and we started this whole thing with only 3,200 people and 6 art forms. And what we wanted to see is whether these extremely rich and extremely specialized traditional skills can be professionalized into sustainable livelihood generation. And along with that came other things, but we did not think of those other things when we started. We were just focusing on creating sustainable income opportunities and entrepreneurship. We chose community entrepreneurship because that is how, with the scale that we are talking about and with the kind of specialization, that is the only way it can have a broad-based impact and create an overall socially and economically empowered community. So when we say Art for Life and generally Be Present, we always say that our focus is not artist, our focus is village, finally. So we work with the art form, developing it, the artist, their capacity building. So we are enabling them to actually understand and choose social entrepreneurship. It is not that everybody chooses entrepreneurship, many don't. So again, finally, it is the community's choice. We are not making them do anything, but we are enabling them with various capacities to choose and take it up and then move forward. And finally, it's the village, because the interesting thing is when we started this project, we figured that there are lots of other things that are happening around it. Like sanitation is getting better, like the children are going to school, like they are trying to learn spoken English, they are traveling internationally, so they have other kinds of aspirations, or they want to contribute in some way to their own community and things like that. So when those started coming in as experiences from the community, again, those learning were put back into the project design to, as you said, to take it to the next level. So these were a series of many small projects which actually sort of integrated together to present what I, to sort of lead to what I presented now. Like tourism, cultural tourism was an offshoot of this project. We did not target cultural tourism, but then it became a very interesting economic opportunity for the craftspersons. And because there was cultural tourism, the youth and the other local villagers also generated income by opening homestays, by opening eateries, by doing transport business and things like that. So it builds an entire ecosystem. But then this has really happened in phases. And as we have learned and we have gone along, we have also sort of, there the data has been very important for us. We have collected it. We have sort of analyzed it, based on it, we have started the next experiment. And over a 15 years period, I would say that it has turned into an integrated model. So yeah, if that answers your question.
It's somewhat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madhura. Maybe I will skip to another question. Please feel free to ask the questions. If you want to present what are you doing and you want to share with us, please do that. If not, there is still Andre here, and probably there are already a few questions asked also like typed in the system. But before we skip to these questions, please, maybe you have more. I don't see now, so maybe Andre, I can read these questions, but maybe you prefer to do that as a manager of this system. So please.
As you wish. I don't mind. So I think the first question was from Tomasz, and he already asked what the goal of the research is. The next question is about the finding right methodologies. So the question is how to involve citizens into research and keep the level of engagement manageable in terms of time efficiency.
If I can add something more, I think these questions can be connect actually with the next one, because the next one is about involving the more modern technical ways of collecting data, which also refers to tools and methodologies of collecting them. So we can try to answer these questions together maybe. So one is what to do to involve people to take part into research or to collect data actually. And the other is using all these modern technologies rather advantage or disadvantage for us, for you as an activist. I mean, you know, sometimes when we ask someone to make a video of what are you doing, is better than to answer in a normal oral way. But for the other, all these technologies can make us like, yeah. So the question is, what is your opinion on this actually, please?
If I could say, Mario, sometimes just adding to the point that you made, sometimes alternative means of expressing what you want to say and using that as a route through to collecting information. I love the concept, which is being used quite a lot in different countries, but Madhura mentioned using the theater as a tool to articulate issues that affect your lives, which you may not wish to talk about or are unable to talk about or feel diffident about talking, but you can actually express yourself through theater, through art forms of different kinds about key issues affecting your lives. So that's another methodological tool to consider.
So can I add to that? So just to share again, because we have, so that's sort of a shift that we did, because we always used theater for physically reaching out to people. That was the forte. And then mobilizing the community. But then eventually, as technology developed, as there were many other methods coming in, we started using other digital methods. Photography, painting, all these have been extremely good tools for research, and for sensitive research like trafficking again. So other than theater, which is physically reaching out. But in the more recent times, especially during the pandemic time, because we had to keep in touch with the communities we work with, not for research, but just for having the understanding of what is going on ground and whatever way we can help them. We actually, which we had started earlier, but did not emphasize so much, we actually started teaching them remotely how to use Zoom, how to use their mobile for live Facebook events, for WhatsApp and things like that. So the elderly people did not take that up as a tool, but the younger people, the youth, took it up as a tool, and they facilitated all the communication in the field. So we were doing a research on the music tradition, the folk music tradition of the desert musicians of Rajasthan. And that got stopped when the corona started. But then a lot of it was done on Zoom. So it took time. It took patience. It took many meetings. But then it was a very, very successful way of finally making them used to the technology and getting the information out, and with the whole concept of realizing that, okay, if I'm sitting at home, necessarily I am not isolated. That is the first feeling that comes in. So we have been using technology, and I think for practitioners, we are heavily depending on technology more and more for continuing work in many ways, as we understand that the ways of working may change completely over time now. So.
Thank you very much. This actually refers to the next question, which is typed also by one of participants, which is about sharing the results of the research of citizen entrepreneurship, which is actually the same, because what Madhura said is more about targeting the ways of collecting data, targeting the ways of communicating with people within the community and outside the community, depending on age and of course other features, social features, let's say. But it's the same actually, I think, with disseminating the results. We as a scientist usually are, let's say, demanded, expected to publish everything on scientific journals, but scientific journals are not the best, are not the primary source of information for activists. This is probably some kind of reports, or more and more often some videography, I think. So this is also a challenge, I think, for us as a scientist to share it in a more, let's say, attractive and effective way. Leonie is raising the questions. Please, Leonie.
Yes, so I was raising the question, but before, I would actually like to come back to the time efficiency when involving citizens. So I think it's important to include, or even invite researchers to the activities you or the citizen entrepreneurs do anyways. So researchers do not always need separate appointments for interviews, for example, that are obviously very time consuming. So most valuable and many times really are the activities that the citizen entrepreneurs, the citizens usually do anyways. So the discussions they have among them, among their peers, among their teams anyways, the meetings that they have with governments, with citizens and so on. So I do not know whether the others agree, but in my point of view, this is the case, that instead of always having separate interviews, for example, it's also valuable to say, okay, hey, actually we have next week this meeting, you could actually join, maybe this is already valuable. So you don't always need extra effort for that. And maybe also for sharing the data, maybe this is a valuable thought. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Again, problem with finding a unmuting button. Yes, actually, it's what we are trying to say with Agnieszka also, showing how much important it is to engage activists themselves in collecting. It's even not producing the data. It's the way of giving it for the research reasons in the daily work. Actually, that's why. But at the very end, the real techniques of doing it are not so easy from the even technical point of view, because it's still about organizing some focus groups, maybe some photo elicitation, video elicitation, etc. It's everything is interesting, but at the very end, the question is how much it is just discussion, and how much it is professional collection of data. I think this is quite of big challenge. But I agree with you that this way of collecting data is the most effective, especially in this kind of phenomenon. Okay. Any more questions? Any more? Any more wishes to add something to this discussion, please? Jay and Ursula.
So Ursula, go first.
Ursula, please.
Well, I think the final question on the board is quite interesting, because it says, you know, what is the ultimate aspiration of citizen entrepreneurship research, and with regard to changing the economic system. And I would be interested in the activists' views on to what extent they are driven by the dominance of economic thinking in many communities, and how this might actually have driven them to do something different from what usually is known. So is the economic system and what it represents, is that a reason for engaging in looking for alternative methods, like looking for alternative currency, Tomasz, or looking for alternative ways of organizing things and selling things, not for money, but for other things, and how to collaborate and so on?
Yes, Jay wants to ask the question, so maybe I will pass the voice to Jay, and after that we'll try to respond to Ursula and Jay's.
Thank you, Mario. I didn't want to intervene in the process, but I think one way of Ursula's question was right on cue. One way of answering that question is perhaps to look at many other models and examples, because I mean, the way we are trying to engage with the idea of citizen entrepreneurship is that it's polycentric, and that it's not just one project or one fit for all kind of model that applies. And so it might be useful to bring in now our prospective new members. And I think we've got several people over here who are very eager to showcase at least a little bit of the kind of work that they do. And I think that can fuse in to some of the questions that have been raised already, Mario, and particularly your last question. Could I ask, and I think one or two of you have to leave early. I mean, there's Anders and Silke to talk a little bit about the project that they're doing in Denmark. There is Mariam to talk a little bit about what you are doing in Egypt, of course, a very exciting education project. And there's Giles in the UK, the Cultural Engine Hub, and other aspects around it, which is involving citizens in a variety of very different ways. So please, I mean, could I bring you all in and perhaps start with Silke and see how we move forward on that? Silke and Andres, of course.
Yes, happy to do that. Maybe first of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting us to this workshop. It has been very interesting to see all the different approaches and projects. Yeah, and I would like to introduce my colleague Anders. Anders is working on a master project that is related to citizen entrepreneurship, and I think he has quite interesting cases to share If it's okay with you, Anders, maybe you could say a few words about your project and about the citizen entrepreneurship initiatives that you're looking at.
Yeah, I'll try to do it briefly. I'll jump over to my presentation. So basically, I'm looking at how Danish rural entrepreneurs are working, and what issues they're dealing with in the daily run of their small organizations. And in that regard, I'm looking into how important and visible citizen entrepreneurship is, and what factor that they have for success when looking into entrepreneurial actions. And that in here, I was looking at first I was looking at some communities, and then I was so lucky that our local municipality have 5 cases where they're actually trying to where they have a village, and they have then created a small council that is an umbrella organization for all the volunteer organizations that they have within their village community. And this is a pattern that we're seeing spreading all over Denmark, because that is a necessary factor to get money from the government. If you want to pursue any projects, you need to have a plan for what you want to do with your community. So many communities are starting to make these umbrella organizations to showcase and to come to an agreement of what kind of projects do they want to do to empower their own community, or to do something that makes their community better. And that is really interesting, because it gives some power to the community where they can actually make a difference. That correlates a little bit to this theoretical thing as what is citizen entrepreneurship, with the interrelationship between the government and the entrepreneurial citizens, and what they can give to each other in terms of social value and reputation, and facilities and funds and knowledge. And that made me curious of what is actually the overlapping goals of all these different organizations. And I think one of the others were also talking about it, the social institutions and the government don't necessarily have the same agenda as irregular citizens and what irregular citizens want to do. Neither does a standard entrepreneur. An entrepreneur might have goals that is not beneficial for society or for the regular citizens. But there's a big area where there's a lot of overlap, where the social institutions and the citizens and the governments, they want to do something together. And it's in this area where I imagine this entrepreneurial citizen and this citizen entrepreneurship, the whole methodology and the whole topic is moving around inside this topic. So what I tried to do was I did a little bit of literature research, and then I went into the Gaia methodology, and that's basically get a lot of data. So I went out and interviewed 12 different organizations, and that led me to a lot of different citations. And I tried to do it manually, because it doesn't work so well for me online. It turned out that it's impossible to do offline because it's simply too much data for me to organize. So after sorting it a little bit, I had to sort it into even smaller parts, and then I made it into a more digital version. Sorted it out, starting to create notes. What is it? What kind of different topics are emerging? What kind of themes do I have? And then trying to make it into concepts and seeing what is leaping out, what is not something that I have seen in literature so much. So this is also the part where I'm now, where I'm trying to look into literature and see what is all the things that I found. This is something that is already well documented in literature. And I think one of the topics that I find very interesting is kind of the burnout factor of how these organizations are running, but also how many people are burned out of these organizations, as to say that they run out of motivation. So everything is driven by motivation, everything is driven by success, everything is driven by passion. But if you run out of these, and that can be bureaucratic reasons or many other reasons, or working together with researchers who only use very research terms and don't talk plainly, it can also take a lot of energy out of you, because you are a private citizen and you have many other agendas in your day, and it's really quickly that you can run out of this passion and ambitions. And that is kind of where I am in my process right now. So that is a quick introduction to my project and what I'm working on.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting indeed, an approach which is taking on board a number of issues that we have discussed, but also adding your own agenda to that. Silke, did you want to add anything to that as Anders supervisor?
Yeah, I was just wondering, maybe at some point, if Anders is also up for it, there might be a chance to share a bit more, maybe going a little bit more deeply into at least some of the cases, because I think they are very interesting cases. And yeah, this perspective, not only seeing it as an urban phenomenon, but also as a rural phenomenon. So to see the citizen in the more the role of citizenship in that sense, maybe that is also very interesting. But we have seen that also from earlier cases, that this might be kind of maybe an extra contribution.
Yeah, I think that's quite important. So it's not just a question of how entrepreneurship addresses these bigger issues of our times, but what impact does it have on citizenship itself, or our understanding of citizenship? I mean, that's something which is being questioned a lot in many countries around the world. And because people haven't come to grips with it, really, and feel that on the one hand, citizens are being fragmented and expressing themselves in all kinds of sort of unusual ways to combat problems in their lives. But and therefore the question of governance comes in, and how do you actually do decision making with citizens? So that could be quite interesting. And just one other thing to both of you, we would request that any of the projects, if they are interested, all of them ideally, but if any of them are interested in becoming part of the network that we are trying to build up over here, that would be very interesting indeed. And I would encourage you perhaps to help us with that prospect if possible. And we can look at that at a later date. Can I turn to thank you again for both of you for that very neat presentation. Mariam, you're doing something amazing in Egypt. And I think with Alan there also sort of supporting you in a big way, you couldn't have a better mentor, of course. Mariam, do you want to say a few words about your project and how that's involving communities and citizens?
Yes, I'm very lucky to have Alan as my mentor. It's been quite an exciting journey. I tried to put my ideas in 3 slides so that it's not too much. So I'll give it a go, and I'll see if I can share my screen. I have 2 screens, so I hope I can share the right one. Yeah, okay. So basically, the project is called A Renewed Mind. And it's a social enterprise in Egypt focusing on education. In our discussion with His Excellence Dr. Tariq Shawi, Egypt's Minister of Education, we were talking about curricular reform initiatives in Egypt. I quote, his concern was that the main problem is with the mindset of society where teachers work and where schools are immersed. You might come up with brilliant ideas for educational reform. However, if you don't address the societies from the bottom up, you might not make sure that the implemented curriculum adjusts with the ethos you have of the educational reform. In a similar conversation with Her Excellence Dr. Laila Skandar, Egypt's former Minister of State and Environmental Affairs, in view of foreign initiatives for educational development, I quote, she said, there is no evidence that these initiatives have been sustained beyond the accompaniment of the donor, which in other words means that projects exist for some time, as long as the donor is there and as long as they're monitored correctly, but then they don't live longer than that. And hence we need solutions that are locally owned and locally sustained, hence citizen entrepreneurship. That's why we thought of an agenda for behavioral change that comes from within. So let me recap again. The need is to provide solutions from within. The need is to embed these solutions within, not just coming up with the solutions, but making sure that they're embedded within society. The need is to foster and sustain these solutions within. So it's not enough to come up with solutions and to embed them, but you need to make sure that they will keep on existing. And the need to act as change agents from within, to have ambassadors from within the system. And this is our understanding of citizen entrepreneurship solutions. So how do we do that? We develop ideas that are called for by locals. We mobilize solutions to be contextually relevant and culturally sensitive, as we heard this morning. We implement culturally viable and sustainable solutions to ensure local buy-in. And we have a monitoring and evaluation framework to make sure that things are well sustained and that the change agency is in place. So what exactly are we offering? We're offering holistic whole school approaches that address the school as a microculture, which in other words means it's school support based on participatory research, as we heard earlier today from the other projects. It includes community engagement and fostering of a network of change agents. We hold awareness raising initiatives for parents and other social stakeholders, and we've been doing this using the arts as a medium for community engagement. And finally, we do training for teachers and leaders to become local stationed researchers and change agents. So where do we stand now? We've registered as a shareholding company in the UK. We've recruited a board of advisors, and we have ongoing discussions with the British Embassy in Cairo. We're funded by Cambridge Public Engagement for the awareness raising initiative that uses the arts. We have ongoing, ongoing discussions with Hughes Hall Cambridge for further collaboratives, and we are always on the lookout for seed funding. So that's where we stand today. I was wondering if you want to share some of your thoughts and ideas in that regard. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Very succinct and very clear and very precise in terms of how education is seen more to be a wider social project rather than something which is done separately for society as such. Alan, did you want to add anything at all to what Mariam was saying? Alan may not be around, or you're muted anyway. I'll come back to you, Alan, in due course. Okay, Giles, would you like to tell us about your fascinating stuff that you're doing in the east of England and elsewhere?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Jay, and thanks for having me. Can I show up? I've only got one slide. Is that all right?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jay, and thanks for having me. It's been a really interesting day. I've been listening into the whole thing. We've got a project in Essex, in the east of England, called Free Market Radicals, which is publicly funded at the moment through the Emerging Futures Fund, looking at sort of post-COVID economic and social revival and all the narratives that have been generated from that. And the reason that's interesting to this is because it's sort of become more and more focused on citizen entrepreneurship and engagement, really. I run a social enterprise called the Cultural Engine. We're managing it, and we work with other people, and we're working with local authorities in the area. It's focused on market towns, so relevant to the last one. We're not focused on cities, and there is a rural context to what we're doing. We're looking at that because they're very close to the way people perceive their local economies. And obviously we're looking at the limitations to the market in a sort of pure global sense, if you like, as opposed to the local market. And we're looking at how to mobilize entrepreneurs to sort of take up the challenge of market town regeneration and sort of high street regeneration, and sort of create a sense of more sort of cultural vibrancy in the area. I don't know if this is just an English or UK issue. I don't know whether high streets in Poland and Denmark and Germany and other places are struggling like they are in England. Be interesting to consider the role of civic entrepreneurship there. Obviously local networks need improving to support that, and we've been looking very much, because this is the program, about the narratives, the narratives people talk through and about their place, and how that frames what might happen around sort of local agenda. So the project is we're sort of reinventing and well, looking at reinventing and regeneration market towns, the theory of this, and it's a national obsession, as I say. It's where the majority of people still live. 36.5 million people live in towns as opposed to cities in England and Wales. So the way that they mobilise and vote and you know, things like that makes a big difference to the larger places like Bristol and London in the United Kingdom. So it's an important context to think about in terms of citizen engagement. A project that recognises the limitations of the free market, as I say, a terminology that emerged from sort of historic times around markets, which still exist in these market towns today. But of course, local people and groups want to see their important central and civic spaces revived to have a strong economic and social and cultural future. So what to do about that? There's been a lot of talk about this nationally, and it tends to converge around the idea of localism, which obviously is focused on citizens taking up the challenge with local institutions. A high street or a town centre and shops in it is like a sort of it's a view into the global economy if you buy goods from all over the world. But a desolate, empty high street and shop is similarly a sort of view into a void that sort of global capitalism offers to many local places in terms of solutions. So it's an interesting concept. It's tangible, you know, to people in terms of that. So localism needs to be made not an abstract concept, but one that considers citizens' engagement, citizen entrepreneurship at the core and engagement. So what foundations for this can we identify, build on, establish in towns, and you know, to help local people, if you like, lead on curating their high street. If the market's not going to deliver for them, they have to take an interventionist approach. And what structures can we identify that can help build this locally in towns and villages across England? For example, parish councils are very hyper-local democratic institutions that sort of emerged after, you know, possibly hundreds and maybe thousands of years of sort of development, but they tend to be quite small in terms of their outlook and approach, but they do have resources, advocacy, spaces, you know, and a sort of role in generating this, but often that doesn't happen. So we need to revisit this. So we're involving citizens in 4 or 5 market towns in Essex. We're doing it through surveys. Because of COVID, we couldn't get out in our own market stall and start talking to them. But this has been very successful to understand what they're saying, understand their narratives, and we have to say that you know, this is primarily one of loss and of change, but there's also a strong interest in heritage and culture to an extent, which sort of tends to bind everything together, which is why I was interested in the example from India about sort of culture sort of being a sort of a link between everybody and the framing of it. It would be the case for heritage and culture to an extent here, and heritage is important for the sort of economics of uniqueness, as certain economists have discussed in the past. Why are we involving citizens? Because, you know, the market and local authorities can't take up all the slack and respond to the requirements to sort of, you know, see the change happen that people want. We need to understand how powerful or otherwise citizens feel at the moment and what they feel they want to do about that, and find ways to mobilize the systems, if you like. Identify greater levels of collaboration, limits of local structures and governance to facilitate this, what can be done locally to support citizen entrepreneurship and sort of citizen engagement and mobilize that. And the formal processes like planning and economic development strategies, top-down sort of stuff doesn't seem to be working at the moment and won't deliver. And I think the most important thing we are learning is that you've got to bring economics down to the local level so that people can see the tangible impact of the actions that they take. And then that will generate more citizen entrepreneurship and solutions to sort of tackle the key issues that people can see in their place. So we collect data. We've got over 750 responses, quite detailed responses so far. And then we followed this up with workshops. And I think the process of collecting data makes you able to get more data, because you then have talking points in order to collect more information, both sort of, you know, sort of hard data around figures and numbers, but a lot of narrative data as well, and sort of stuff that people are saying is really important. And when you say people are saying this around localism, people then kick back and say, well, this is what I think to that. And you start the conversation, it grows in a place, more places. Also provides evidence for funding to get initiatives off the ground. enables you to explore the idea of loss, how that frames what people want to do, which is potentially quite a negative term, and you need to sort of understand what that means and try and twist it around if you can. There's a very strong sense of sort of the need to lead locally, which is a challenge to these sort of established structures in towns across England. You know, it's an ongoing process, and we're at the beginning, and we're starting to mobilise some specific initiatives in these towns now that people can really get behind, but also supporting what's already going on. There are groups, there are interesting sort of business initiatives, there are local authorities doing interesting things. But in the whole nature of our work and the cohort that we're working with, it does tend to be in Scotland in particular, rather than England, that these things are more sort of commonplace around mobilising commons and those sort of concepts, and less so in England, and certainly less so in the southeast of England. So there are regional differences within the UK there. So yeah, but it's ongoing, and yeah, I think it's very relevant to the whole idea, because in the end, localism has to mobilise citizen entrepreneurs to lead the process.
Thank you.
I hope that was short enough to and
very useful indeed. And I think, just if I may add, Giles, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the important features of market towns is, apart from the fact that they are smaller than bigger urban conurbations, they kind of straddle the urban and rural divide very well in the UK. And of course, the heart of the social dynamics of market towns are the markets, and they still remain at the center of a lot of economic activity that takes place. And these markets tend to attract not only local producers and local vendors, but large numbers of market vendors from all over the place. And I at one stage tracked several of them across different markets in Europe. And which was quite interesting, because I love going to markets in cities and towns. And I was amazed to find how often I came across the same vendors. Once in, let's say, Market Harborough or somewhere in the UK, and the following day just outside Barcelona, and on a third day just outside Paris or somewhere in Italy, and the same group of people moving around, and kind of creating a kind of sort of undercurrent of globalization, which is seldom recognized in terms. And these kind of people and their activities really bring together communities, because they operate 2 to 3 times a week, and essentially act as a galvanizing force for people to come, attend, just like churches used to do before, and pubs have always done in the UK in the past, before they became gastronomical entities and catering only to the well-off. So markets have still retained that social identity very strongly. But I think, if I may, this connects also very well with Mariam's question about essentially how do you engage and learn from other people and other projects around this social element. And I think you will see that from all the presentations made in the previous sessions and even now, that angle, that driving home the necessity for social cohesion and kind of sort of social cogency is critical to our appreciation of how the world is changing, but also how we can cope with that changing world, not necessarily with the instruments and with the measures that we have known in the past, but also with perhaps new ways of thinking, A, about entrepreneurship, B, about society broadly speaking, C, about people's behavior, fourth, about wealth creation, and what does that mean? Because the economics behind wealth creation has always kind of reflected on the exclusiveness of certain groups of people, the entrepreneurs who have driven the society by and large. And wealth distribution or redistribution has always been taken as some kind of stuff extra, which either you leave untouched or you somehow deal with it when the going gets tough for politicians. But so a new way of thinking, that in itself is entrepreneurial. And the methodologies that kind of sort of support both the research and the involvement of citizens in research allows for an entrepreneurial approach to doing research and design itself. And I think sort of, the kind of sort of question, if you're looking for key words that have emerged from the session, are from all the sessions really, are that of localism. What happens locally matters globally. It's not what is global is local. It's what happens locally matters globally. And a kind of radical localism is what we're talking about. A terminology that, a term which quite often features today in discussions is deliberative democracy, where you actually engage with citizens in a way that they can inform decision-making, which is aided and supported by technological inputs. We've talked about the commons, of course, and the social mechanism process. And the other one is that of place and space. A space defined in geographical terms as a territory within which we are constituents or agents or simply bit players. But space, place rather, is where we actually make our lives worthwhile. We have a sense of belonging. And quite often that place element, the contextual element of place, has been eroded by too much of homogeneity in terms of economic activity in looking at spaces. And of course, the other thing is citizen entrepreneurship, wherever it works and how it works, is by definition polycentric. You cannot have one project in any urban or rural environment addressing all the changes, but they can learn from each other, they can communicate with each other, they can engage with each other. And that means a different kind of diversity of approach, which is essentially saying that there are different functions, different catalysts, different methods, and that we need somehow, because that's what makes citizens. Citizens are not a homogeneous entity. And therefore, this diversity needs to be represented in that kind of sort of decision making. It's different from what we know about diversity, which is trying to look at equality of opportunity, whereas we forget about the equality of condition. Michael Sandel, in his wonderful book, The Tyranny of Merit, a recent publication, talks about this factor, that through meritocracy, we may have been foundering around this idea of equal opportunities, but we've forgotten equality of condition. If you do not have equality of condition, you cannot possibly have equality of opportunity. I was listening to a debate yesterday at the RSA, in which the other RSA, in which people talked about, is necessity the mother of invention? Well, some people say it is, other people say it isn't. And the speaker said that, well, if necessity was the mother of invention, then you will have more innovation in poorer countries and not alone in the rich countries. And I begged to differ with the speaker, because what he was missing from that is context. Innovation has its own context, and what is innovation in sub-Saharan Africa or in other parts of the world is very different from what happens in California or Silicon Valley, etc., because we're too hooked up into this notion that as long as we create a high-tech business or a new venture, we are somehow involved in innovation and entrepreneurship. So, and this idea, other terms that have featured today have been about engagement, which is the prime purpose of our project. Collective efficacy. Entrepreneurship talks a lot about self-efficacy, that entrepreneurs are driven by this notion of believing in themselves and making things happen. Yeah, but what about collective efficacy? That's where citizens become involved, and not necessarily in pursuing the traditional entrepreneurial dream of starting a new venture for which they can seek an IPO in 3 years. So different functions. And finally, at the end of it, another terminology, which is being used quite a bit in the UK. And there's a wonderful model in the city of Preston, in the north of this country, where they talk in terms of how the city itself becomes an agency for community wealth creation. So wealth creation turns on its head as being a community-led wealth creation project. That was my kind of way of trying to summarize as quickly as possible, because the law of diminishing returns is affecting us, and we are losing people gradually by having stretched ourselves for a pretty long period of time. But I don't want to finish without any quick questions from anyone first, and then Ursula, Marius, and Agnieszka, if you want to add anything, and of course, Madhura, any final comments that you may wish to have. Firstly, any quick questions, anyone? Not a speech, but just a quick question. Anyone from the day's proceedings?
I think Andre is raising hand.
Thank you.
Andre.
I have a question to Giles. So referring to the last question we had in the Etherpad, so would you say the citizen entrepreneurship approach is a way to replace the traditional market system, or is it complementary to solve issues that come up because of the market system?
The market system, I mean, this is a sort of very broad sweeping statement, but the market system in towns has delivered to an extent, but delivered sort of corporate standardization, which has now failed, obviously, because of COVID and sort of global economic challenges. But people still feel they want their traditional space and their traditional spaces. If they want that, therefore, there's a space for them, and they have to sort of curate it as a creative experience and get involved in the local economy. It can't replace it. People talk about community wealth building in England sort of being a challenge to sort of the global economic system. It's never going to replace that, but it carves out a space. I think it's complementary, but in smaller towns and places, it can have a big impact. And as long as you create the sort of culture and the sort of platform for people to try things out and do things, have access to spaces that they need, then they can make a big difference to those places and create those hubs of activity and culture, activity and heritage that they really want, as well as more commercial propositions as well. So I think it has to go together. I think towns are a good place to try that thing out.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? One quick question. I'll take up to 3 max. How can I incentivize you? I don't have chocolates to give you, virtually or otherwise. Any other way of making you ask a question if you want to? Nope. Okay. Right. If there are no other questions, could I then rely on my extraordinary collaborators in this game? And that is, of course, Ursula, Marius, and Agnieszka, and Madhura, for any final quick comments that you may wish to make.
I just very briefly want to say that I thought today's presentations and discussions were really wonderful, very, very, very different, and yet they all, taken together, show new paths for how we can develop that. So thank you very much for your presentations and discussions. And well, I hope that we can develop this network further and that we will engage in these fruitful discussions more often. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ursula. Agnieszka, are you around?
I think not yet, so maybe I will speak on behalf of me and Agnieszka. Yeah, actually, I can just confirm what you, Jay, said about this diversity and what Ursula said just 1 second before, that the range of presentation was very wide. The same we have in the results of our short survey, like this, the subject of the interest of citizen entrepreneurs is very, very, very broad, and it's good, I think. The challenge, I think, for us is to make some way of taking it together and present it somehow. Sally, before she left, told that there are some possibilities of publishing it somehow. So why not? We try to do it just to share it. I think it's quite interesting. And at the very, very, very end, I think that the last question from this application that we have on your path is the really most interesting. I think Ursula already asked this question, but there is no time to respond. Like, could this method be fundamentally, can this method fundamentally change our economic system? This, I think, is quite important and like the meta question that we can live with. Thank you.
Thanks, Marius. Madhura, any final comments?
No, not really. Just that this was an excellent exposure and a learning experience for us, because we are so much caught up in managing and addressing field challenges and requirements. So this is very, very rich, and really liked all the presentations. I could identify with a number of things that were presented from other countries as well. And it is very interesting, and it will be a great learning process for us to be a part of this network. Thank you.
Thanks. Now, there's one person who hasn't spoken this entire afternoon, and I cannot believe that has actually happened. It is almost like a tectonic shift, and that is Alan Barrow. Alan, are you still with us? No, he's left us, unfortunately. I would have loved Alan to have given some kind of sort of wisdom, to throw some wisdom from his incredible network of activities that he pursues. He, as you know, is the unofficial mayor of Cambridge, and because he just knows too many people, both in Cambridge but globally. And everybody knows him, and nobody actually sort of dares not knowing him. Where are you, Alan? You've disappeared again. Right, I thought I saw you. Anyway, Alan is not there. Anybody else? Any one final comment or observation that you wish to make? No. Okay. I would just like to sort of say that I think we have moved on quite considerably from where we were with our first workshop. And despite the huge problems of COVID and lack of communication, particularly face-to-face communication, which still, I believe, is the best mechanism for generating citizen action of any form that you can think of, that we have made quite a lot of progress. And in this discussion today, very rich discussion today, of approaches to how we do our research, but also how we use an action research methodology to involve people on the ground, projects and citizens on the ground, to be involved in research, to engage in the networks that they have, is, of course, crucial to our development. I particularly want to thank everybody who participated and all my collaborators for being so engaged, as they always are. So that's not new. And I think sort of, and the Andre, of course, for being solid and stoical. And Simon, where are you? From Durban. I thought you wanted to say a few words. I could not see your name anywhere. Ah, there you are, Simon. Sorry if I did not ask you earlier on. Do you want to say a few words? You're doing some wonderful projects in Durban. And do you want to say a quick few words?
So we really resonate with all the work that you've been done. So we are working with rural areas with social and environmental entrepreneurs. But we have been trying to collect data about the state of the situation with COVID. So this citizenship, entrepreneurship really gives some good ideas that we can implement. So I will be taking them back to the Department of Economic Development to try and get a sense of what's happening within our province. But we have been severely impacted by COVID. So the citizen research should really help to formulate policy for government as well. So that will be very important. But the social entrepreneurs that we have been training, have been very resilient and are still in business in spite of COVID. So the resilience and the mindset that we have developed with them has really had an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And I think it would be great to have more interactions with you, and especially from projects in South Africa, which might wish to be part of this network that we're trying to sort of build up around the concept of citizen entrepreneurship. So I will talk to you more offline, and perhaps we can engage in some kind of sort of deliberation on that front. Because at some point in time, we want to give the projects themselves a kind of sort of voice in terms of developing the agenda for our project. So in that sense, it will be very important that Mariam, Simon, Anders, and everybody else to actually become involved, perhaps in as best a way as possible. There are no demands on you in terms of joining the network. There is no subscriptions to pay. There are no special privileges that you have to aspire to, or anything of that nature at all. It will be entirely democratic in that process and open as part of an open network, and the best way of participating that we can do. I was just wondering if Alan is back. Mariam, do you know if Alan is back? I can't see him now, so.
I think he might have had a meeting afterwards.
Yes, I think he did mention. So he's part of the law of diminishing returns in action, and as is going to happen to all of us. Well, again, thanks everybody for participating, and thank you especially to my collaborators and all the presenters. And thank you to Andre as well again. And I'll be talking to as many of you as possible, and please keep in touch through the project website. We're also going to open a blogs page on the project website. So if you have got little stories to tell us, please fill them in as we go along. That will be available fairly soon. The RSA runs the website for us, so I have to engage with them to ensure that that is alive and works as smartly as possible. So thank you again until the next workshop, which I think will be in about 6 months' time, but we'll keep you informed and hopefully obtain your participation in the best way possible. This was a terrific event, exceeded my expectations in terms of turnout, and certainly exceeded in expectations in terms of the quantity and quality of the presentations that were made. So thank you very much, Namaskar, and all the very best for everything. And please stay in touch. Take care and keep well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.